Welcome everyone to this latest Quest software presentation called Renovating SharePoint. My name is Doug Davis. I'm the product director here at Quest Software in our SharePoint product group. And today we're going to be talking about just basically, when it's time to think about changing your SharePoint infrastructure and making it more in line with what you either expected or what the business expected from SharePoint itself. So just a little bit of an introduction and why this is a problem that could potentially occur at any organization. And it's basically that the nature of SharePoint is such that really it is one of the most interesting and exciting technologies to come along in a while. And I always say that, well, sometimes it looks like it's just an amalgam of a lot of other things that we used to have in the past. What really is different about SharePoint is its integration with Office, how easy it is to deploy, and how easy it is for end users to use it. You sort of have these three core foundations of the technology that really allows its adoption to be very fast, very ferocious, but at the same time it's often undisciplined. And when it's undisciplined, what happens is that we could end up with a lot of data that's in places that necessarily doesn't need to be or where it shouldn't be. Now, with any technology that is rapidly adopted, at some point somebody says, okay, this is fantastic, this is great, I'm really glad that everybody started to use this technology. But at the same time, we need to now wrap our heads around it, understand how it's being used. And that usually entails some sort of centralized administration, some sort of a plan or approach that basically somebody says, at this point now, I need to actually make a decision and make some choices on where I'm going to take this technology into the future. And then since SharePoint is so data-driven, it's all about creating lists, it's all about creating documents, about sharing documents, about having that collaboration happen throughout the organization. When somebody does eventually sit down and say, I'm going to take care and take control of this SharePoint environment, the first thing they do usually discover is that this data is basically all over the place because there wasn't a centralized approach. It could be in small pockets throughout the organization, and that necessarily leads to some concerns that this data is actually not where we need it or not where we want it. And one of the things, and we'll talk a little bit about this as well, is that SharePoint in the way that it's designed at the time of install really puts it into a position where usually you don't want to or you can't use these pockets of data where they've sort of been placed so far, because there probably have been some design decisions that were made at the time of installation that will result in that data potentially being in areas that might even be dangerous or potentially unusable. And when we talk about what these design decisions are, and it's really not a decision, it's almost a lack of decision, is that something that I call the 1-1-1 trap. So that when you install SharePoint, and remember, SharePoint has a version that's very popular, that's basically free. If you have a server 2003 or 2008 license, you basically have access to a free, very full functional SharePoint services software that you can just install. And so that means that a lot of people are installing SharePoint that maybe are not traditional IT types, don't necessarily go through all the documentation or understand how they want to deploy this. And SharePoint does not allow you, doesn't allow you, but tends not to really ask you a lot of questions as you go through the configurations. And that configuration does lead most people down this 1-1-1 trap. So one server, one site collection, and one content database. And we'll talk a little bit about where each one of those ends up putting data where it doesn't really belong or gives us a design that's not going to grow with us as the company goes. Now, what you need to do is really understand, first of all, the best thing is to educate as many people as you can around this challenge. You can create a web farm with more servers. You want to create a lot more site collections, and you definitely want to create a lot more content databases as well. Nothing stopping you from doing that except the fact that that design is relatively hidden, because one of Microsoft's core goals was to get the software out as easy as possible, and they've definitely been successful for that. But this is the biggest cause of SharePoint renovations. Basically, people sit down, take a look at their environment and say, well, wait a second, why do we have the design that's a little bit more restricted than we would like? And when you look under the covers, it's because of this inherent non-visibility on these particular challenges as you go through. So this is something I always want to introduce sort of whenever I'm talking about renovations, whatever type of renovations you're doing within your SharePoint organization, is that, you need to get out of this trap as soon as you can with your organization and get people aware that the 111 trap is something you probably want to try and avoid at all costs. Now, when we're sitting down, we're going like, why are we going to renovate our SharePoint? Why are we going to change things? And this is the usual, 6 sort of core reasons why people want to do that. The main one, of course, is overcrowding. Definitely too much data in too small a space. Because the second one is because of this nature where, first of all, anybody can bring up SharePoint, and that becomes a very active site almost as soon as it becomes live. This is going to be an environment that's probably too distributed. It's not where we want the data. The data is not necessarily all in head office. It's in a lot of different remote offices. Maybe it's even worse under people's desks, maybe even in people's homes that they have servers that we're doing as remote workers. And all of this creates a core document ecosystem and data ecosystem, but so distributed that I can't really get a handle of it. I can't understand how the usage patterns are. I don't know why particular areas are hubs that shouldn't be, and other areas that should be hubs aren't being used. So I do need to sort of go through that from that perspective. Poor design has a whole bunch of different aspects of that, and we'll go through some of that as well. New technology, we have the SharePoint 2010 release coming out very, very rapidly here, and this does often lead us to thinking about some new ways of doing SharePoint. New environments, we're moving to a new head office, we're moving to some new hardware, something like that, and business pressures. Somebody saying basically that our SharePoint environment is just too complex for us to use it. And we'll go through each and every one of these sort of in a little bit more detail to understand why it happens and what you can do to sort of get out of that. So, we said overcrowding is really the core one that happens, and basically, where do we, why does that happen, and how do we get around it? SharePoint collaboration is very intense, and if you think about what happens in collaboration and the way the SharePoint platform works as well, is that I send a document to somebody that's, it's a couple of megabytes in size. That person, I put it into SharePoint, it's stamped with a version. Somebody then sends me that document back. It's version 2, but it basically doubles the size to 6 megabytes. I do some modifications, check that back into SharePoint. Now it's 9 megabytes. For one document, a 3 megabyte document, I've now grown that up to about 9 megabytes. And you can turn version control off, and sometimes it is off, but usually it's on as well. And that's one thing that could just lead to a very massive growth in data within your SharePoint environment. As well, even if I don't have version control off, it just is somewhere that people sort of, that light bulb turns on and says, we finally have a place. It's not a file share. It's some place that we can all get to through a URL, through a very simple to use browser. I can put it into my favorites list. I can do all kinds of things with it. And when I get there, it's functional. I can see things. I can add things to it. It's a much more reliable infrastructure for that. So people put a lot more data in there than we originally think. So you will underestimate how much space you need. There's a lot of different numbers that are out there, 2 to 3 times more than you think will actually go into SharePoint in the first 6 months. And if you don't really capture that information and don't really prepare for that, you will get into some fairly major challenges. Now you may fall into the 111 trap as well, where really what happens is that when you have a single server, first of all, that's more of a scalability problem. But when you have a single site collection, first of all, if we put so many sites under that single site collection, the URLs get very long. It's getting harder for us to find the information. There's some performance challenges that can start hitting it as it goes forward. And it's a single management boundary, so permission management as well becomes very very challenging. But the default install is just to create that one site collection. And unless you think about why you need multiple site collections, you won't understand necessarily right off the bat what that particular challenge could be. And then a more serious problem is having a single content database. Really content databases are something that's hidden from the vast majority of people. We don't really hear about the content databases as an end user, and end users often will install SharePoint Server until the point of time when that content database just becomes too big, 300, 500, 700 gigabytes, 1 terabyte in size. Really, anything over 100 gigabytes is not really recommended. It can scale up a little bit, beyond that. But when we get a lot larger, it becomes a lot more problematic. And when you have content databases of that size, a lot of the flexibility of the system doesn't come into play as well. And you can have quite a few content databases. So if you think about it, if you have 10 gigabyte content databases, each one of those content databases is smaller, easier to index, easier to manage. And if you need to attach them and detach them as you can in SharePoint, you can, a 10 gigabyte one is a lot easier to move than a 200 gigabyte one. And backup and restore, all these things come into play with that. But again, we've been to Fortune 500 companies, some of the largest government agencies in the world, and seeing these fairly, 1 to 2 year old servers that have sort of finally broken their back, that fell into this 111 trap. Somebody installed it, single site collection, single content database, and away you go. Now, what can you do to do this? And later on, when we talk about some of the tools that you can do to do this as well, is that you can do things retroactively. You can add another server to a web farm. You can break out those site collections into multiples. You can add content databases and then move content into them. You can use tools like SDS ADM and third-party tools to automate this. So this is not something that you have to do manually. You can put a lot of automation behind it. Or you can do what a lot of people do sometimes, is just abandon the old infrastructure in place and move to new servers. And we'll talk a little bit about how the move to 2010 with 64-bit only might encourage this as well. But the nice thing about SharePoint is that you can retroactively go in and renovate SharePoint and make it more along the line of what you want. Now, the other problem we talked about is SharePoint distribution, and this is basically the problem where you basically have servers almost anywhere in your organization. This is why discovery tools became quite popular. As I mentioned before, there's nothing that anybody can stop somebody that if I have a server, a 2003 server, and I can have that for any number of reasons. I have a SQL server, I have a BizTalk server, I have the server for any number of reasons within my organization. Then I find out that, hey, I can also download SharePoint, WSS SharePoint services on top of this, and it is fantastically functional in SharePoint 2007. So end users bring up SharePoint servers as required. When somebody, SharePoint is now a technology that's fairly well known. People understand it. People hear about it all the time. So some people are just getting together saying, hey, we need a sales portal. Well, we can do this right here. Just put it under Joe's office and away we go. Or there's a project management team and they say, hey, Jill has probably a SharePoint server that we can use. Just install SharePoint on our 2003 server, and away we go. That's what happens everywhere, and time and time again we've gone into organizations, even organizations that said we have a pretty tight IT system where we won't allow people to install SharePoint. We usually find quite a few actually that's out there. Now, sometimes there is what I refer to as sort of a cathedral environment where you have that one core SharePoint environment that the company basically says this is our corporate SharePoint, and everybody's to go to there. But usually that's only a subset of the overall contents that's there. So one thing you have to do is you have to go out and find out what those usage patterns are. Find out and discover all of that information. And then as part of a renovation, gather and consolidate. It costs a lot. Every server has a license cost. Every server has an energy footprint. Every server has a management footprint. And when you have small pockets of data, 100 gigabytes in a lot of different locations, that's so much more or less efficient than having a single environment that everybody can come to. So gather and consolidate that. And it just basically resolves so many of these core challenges that's there. And one of the things that people sort of get concerned on is each one of those systems is reasonably small. They can scale on their own, but can I scale my cathedral system? And it's incredible that you can scale a SharePoint environment up to. That is the thing. The 1-1-1 rule is basically, if for a quick install, you can have 4 front-end servers, multiple back-end SQL servers. You can have lots of site collections, lots of content databases. You can make it so that that environment is extremely reliable, extremely scalable. And once you have that great centralized SharePoint, basically it then becomes something that people trust, and we can get off of other technology, and we can get off of notes, we can get off public folders, we can get off of file shares, and other document management systems and put it into SharePoint and save the company even more money as we move forward. So this distribution problem, if you do solve it for SharePoint, you do sometimes as well solve it for a lot of other technologies as well. And don't set yourself up for failure. You're not going to be able to move everything through, and you're not going to be able to find every last little bit of SharePoint. But if you do find a lot, you will be able to get the core bits consolidated. And people won't rush to put their own out. You know, they incur costs as well. And also, what happens over time is they don't want to have to keep managing that over time. So if you have a nice, if you've done a good consolidation project and you have a nice intranet that's now on top of SharePoint, people will come and start using it. Another problem is poor design, and this is, the server's in the wrong location. This is sort of where design happens by, first in type of thing. So, we have an organization that's using a fairly sophisticated SharePoint environment, but even though the head office is in the U.S., everybody goes to Guam because that's where Jerry lives, and that's where Jerry brought it up initially, and nobody's ever thought to move it. And you kind of go through a whole bunch of challenges where your patterns do not reflect your IT infrastructure. So that's a fairly consistent poor design. Overall, the design of the SharePoint itself could be very awkward. You could be just having like slapping on web parts that people just sort of build themselves or get from wherever, quickie templates, things of that nature. Does make it a little bit awkward for people to use as well. And then what I call the great URL search. The challenge is that people are really trying to find information in the SharePoint environment. It's a web-based environment. There's no centralized directory for that. And like I say, you always hear about it. Do you have the URL? Maybe John's URL. Where is the URL? I think Sarah knows the URL. You're trying to find out where that information is, or you're using a very obscure naming convention. So it is easy to call things like Corp 1, Corp 2. And was a recent example. There's a Google competitor out there called Wolfram Alpha, and it's just it just doesn't go off the tongue. It's, I've had a number of people come to me and say, "You're talking about this new website that's supposed to this new search engine. What's it called again?" And I'm trying to remember sort of how to spell it. I think we've all done that, where somebody says, "Hey, there's this cool company and it's got some weird obscure name." You have to kind of go through it. So internally, you can be simple. You can name it what you want. So make it simple, and this might be something that drives innovation, because nobody can find something like, for example, at Quest, my server is CAN013726. Try remembering that, and people say, why do we call it CAN013726? Now, it's good for IT. It's an IT tag in a sense. Why don't I just call it Doug's? Doug1. And then that's really something that helps a lot. And so basically rename those URLs so that people can actually find it. Properly set configuration could also be a problem where the server is so improperly configured that it might be worthwhile to simply sort of go to another system. And hard to find anything. So anytime that somebody says we can't find anything in SharePoint, I don't know where anything is in SharePoint, really that's saying that there's probably a poor design. If you renovate that SharePoint, make the hierarchy, make everything sort of a lot quicker and a lot easier to find, then everything will work quite a bit better. And that does lead us into a poor hierarchy. This is something that I see all the time, because sites are usually created as needed. And when a site is created, people usually just look for an environment to set it and say, I need a site. So, somebody sets a site up that tracks all the trucks in our fleet. And somebody says, hey, you have a site collection, you have a site. On a site, I want to create a project management site underneath that. Nothing to do with truck maintenance, but it's there. And then somebody says, oh, you got a site. I want to create an HR database underneath there. So you have three business environments that are applications that are sub-sites of each other. It just doesn't make any sense. And also, if you put a long name in it, so if you call something like Fleet Maintenance System 7, created in August 2009, you'll get these really long URLs that eventually have to be really heavily truncated. And end users are not usually aware of the URL length issue. So the URLs are hard to find. They're too lengthy. They don't reflect. You'll have that. We're talking about that HR site. You have something called, Corp1/Fleet/ project management slash HR. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't sort of roll off the off the tongue. And when people look for a site collection, again, it's the same thing. This is exactly you know, from the perspective, if you don't have a good governance plan around how to create that, people just go around looking for places to find sites. Do you have a site? Can I create a site underneath your site? And, you know, you definitely end up with a hierarchy that has no, you know, no alignment at all with the business model. So you want to arrange sites into a more business-driven structure. You want to have something, so if there's something, you know, kind of call it a site collection called logistics. Underneath that site collection, you have a site called fleet maintenance. You have a site called, you know, tracking assets, things of that nature. And you don't put something else in there. It doesn't make any sense in there. And the same thing happens with document libraries and lists. And I was kind of surprised when we saw a lot of this, where somebody has a site, and that site, you know, just happens I own. It's the only site that I own. And people in my office also want to have a document library or list. I say, well, you know, this is a project management site, but I can create a document library in here, you know, and even though it has nothing to do with what I originally had with that site, it gives people a container to have that. So again, this leads to a very poor hierarchy, a very poor use of the environment. And another reason why you want to do from a perspective of a renovation is the adoption of new technology, and in particular the 2010 upgrade that's coming up in the near future will potentially, you know, cause you to rethink your renovation for all the reasons above. Often they're still not enough. So you're talking to your boss, you're saying, look, I really want to renovate my SharePoint. I really want to get things organized. So, well, we don't really have a project for that. You can sometimes, you know, just as you can sometimes embed other costs into to something a little bit larger, you can embed the renovation cost in a new technology rollout. So one of the things that is happening in 2010 is, first of all, just to give you guys a good feel for it, the upgrade process in 2010 is so much better than 2003 to 2007. So from 2007 to 2010, it's effectively the same technology under the covers, just enhanced. So in 2003, we moved to a completely new platform. In 2007, we basically had to abandon our 2003 environments. You don't have to do that in the 2010 world. So first of all, the upgrade itself will be a lot easier. But when you're rolling out new technology, it's often a good time to push new hardware. So you're saying, you know, you want to do this renovation because of some of the problems that we've talked about already, but I don't want to do it. You know, I can't push it or I can't approve it as a pure, you know, cost improvement. But I'm saying, hey, I'm rolling out 2010. It's got some higher requirements. You know, why don't I get some new hardware for that? It's been 3 years since we've, you know, these servers are all a little bit older. You can use that as a catalyst for that. And some things will have to do that. 2010 is 64-bit only. So if you have 32-bit servers, they will need to be updated as part of the overall infrastructure. Take the opportunity to clean things up as part of a rollout of 2010. So, you know, as you look at your 2010 project, don't think of it just as a simple upgrade. You know, it's kind of the same analogy. You know, you'll garbage in, garbage out. You'll get, if you have a poor design before your 2010 rollout and you just simply upgrade it, you'll have a poorly designed 2010 environment as well with all the inherent problems. And really what we want to do is make sure that this collaboration continues. There are too many examples of initial heavy use of a collaboration technology that just ends up bogging down under its own weight. SharePoint doesn't have to be like that, but you have to follow some of these core things to make sure that they're there. So it's a good opportunity to do that as a renovation. So that's generally it. So, you know, if we kind of review again, you know, what we're sort of going through. You know, you could be you're trying to resolve overcrowding, you're trying to resolve distribution, you're trying to resolve design issues, you're trying to, you know, put out new technology in a new environment and resolve those business pressures around the SharePoint since it didn't come out of the gate designed for how the organization works. So you actually make that decision now. Now you know that this is what you want to do. You want to actually move forward with the renovation. How do you do that? Well, the very first thing, before you do anything, so you're going to be basically migrating data. So you're going to be migrating data within a server, across servers, across web farms, but nothing can get started without fully understanding what you have. And it's like any renovation. You need to know what you have already. If you're renovating a house, you need to understand how the house is structured, where you're going to put it, you know, put the renovation on within the house. Exactly the same thing in this environment. The most important and probably the biggest success criteria is what's your upfront planning like? When you're sitting down and saying, okay, we're going to renovate SharePoint, we're going to move stuff up, move stuff around, this is what we want to actually go through. You need to discover all your SharePoint. You may be shocked or be surprised to find that there are some large SharePoint environments that you're just not involved with, that you need to take under your care. You need to get information on all those things. Are they active? Are they moving forward? This is an example of the information portal in Site Administrator, for example. That will basically show you how many web applications, content, database, site collections you have across your organization, how it's been moving forward, whether it's active or inactive. And you can finally create those clusters of active SharePoint environments and say, okay, well, these are the 8 ones that are really big. I didn't realize how much they're being used, but let's start with those ones. And these other peripheral ones, maybe some will leave in place. Other ones will bring back into the new organization. And you don't necessarily have to be a data migration into a new server, but you might look at some of these and say, well, that's a really big server. Somebody was able to get the funding through some other system. Let's go and at least clean it up, offer our services to that environment, and going prepared and saying, look, this is what you have, this is what you're doing, here's some challenges if you keep doing that. And usually end users, they usually have very little clue as to what those, what could happen because of that, what the ramifications are. They'll usually stand back and say, okay, we didn't realize, we just want to get our job done. That's still the thing, people just want to get their job done, and they want to go through there. So you go through it, you find out everything that you have, you figure out, what the main challenges are to renovate the SharePoint, and then you put together your plan. And you decide what renovation methods you want to have. So if you have too few site collections, you want to plan to break those site collections out. If you have a very complex hierarchy, you want to reorder the sites and understand, where those sites are going to go. If you need to put out, 64-bit technology because of 2010, or if you're going to a new Cathedral SharePoint environment, or you're just trying to get rid of some old servers, you need to move those sites to new servers. Or you may just have a lot of document library. A lot of people create a site just for a document library. You might have hundreds of these, so you don't need to have that many. You can consolidate some of that, especially if they're core information. And again, with the lists as well, you may have lists that you can consolidate and bring forward. So move document libraries and lists. So sort of the 4 core renovation methods, and each one of them, supports a core scenario. And let's dig deeper into each one of those. Seeing how Quest has a tool called Migration Manager for SharePoint that can help you with your renovation, and I think it'll be a good way of also showing, what we want to do with each one of these individually. Just in general, Migration Manager for SharePoint version 2.0, which is now out on the market, supports 03 to 07 and 07 to 07 migrations. And I'm going to be talking primarily on the 07 to 07 world and then the 07 to 2010 world that applies here, as well as 2010 gets rolled out. Basically, you want to be able to migrate information from site to site, migrate information from site to site collection, or migrate lists from somewhere to another site as well. The interface is both embedded in an MMC console as a web instance, but also you can just bring it up in a web. It's a web client, so that you can share this as well. Very simple install and get going. And basically, it's all around the jobs. This is a project. This is not a drag and drop, and forget. This is something you need to plan, be able to go back, look at the completed jobs, look through the logs, understand what in particular is happening. In the most sort of simplistic migration, we're basically trying to move information from one site to another site. So basically wanted to consolidate or change my hierarchy. This has a lot of different benefits, but in this particular case, what I'm trying to do potentially is just, I have something at the top level. It doesn't really belong at the top level. I want to move that site down to a lower level as well. So basically, I want to change the hierarchy. That site will go from that particular environment, in the source URL, to this target URL. And I can also say this is one of the things that we really do, try to encourage, because you can create a job, and a lot of these jobs very much in the past before you actually use them. So you can actually go through the process of, creating a whole bunch of jobs you can then discuss with the team, approve as a team and then run at a later time. Or you can schedule a whole bunch and say, I want to actually have this migration happen at a particular time. But it's very simple. You create a job, create a description, create the source and target URLs. And one of the nice things that we have is that you can then run a pre-migration analysis before you actually do the migration itself. And the pre-migration analysis is basically where I can find out, well, how much is actually going to happen and what's going to do that. So from the perspective of this particular one, so the CRM application I have up on SharePoint shows me how many lists are in there, how many document libraries, how many documents, document versions, document size, things of that nature, document extensions. It basically goes through a whole bunch of information, and it can do some calculation on how long it might think that particular job will go through. So you have a lot of work that you can do to determine how things are working in your environment and how the migration will occur prior to that. And this is for a simple site-to-site migration. So this is within either across farms or within a farm itself. But the net result is that that site is now in a new location. Now, something else that's very heavily leveraged within Migration Manager is the ability to move the SharePoint site out of, and on some sites, out from a large site collection to a new site collection. So we talked about, site collections are a single boundary. They scale quite a bit, but probably not to a level that you absolutely need. URL strings get very long as well, and also there's a lot of stuff that's mixed up and that doesn't make any sense. So let's take a site collection of 500 sites. Let's take 250 of those sites at a particular branch within the hierarchy. I'm going to take those 250 sites and move them up to a new site collection. I have a new management boundary now. I have a new hierarchy. Everything's been moved up. All the URLs have been cleaned up. This is how we simply do this here. We create the target URL, the search URL and the target URL. And what's really nice is that I can also create a new content database. So we also talked about the challenges of having only one content database. So let's say we chose one site collection, put 500 sites in those, and those 500 sites are very active. We now have a content database of 800 gigabytes, massively larger, and we've seen these sites, massively larger than they really should be. Now, because I'm taking 250 sites, I'm creating a new content database as part of my new site collection creation, and so the site collection creation itself has a lot of value, but I'm also creating a new content database or moving it to an existing content database as part of that. So I'm actually solving two problems with this core functionality. So I actually end up with the end result of a very structured environment that has the right number of site collections, the right number of content databases. I can also take a particular list or document library. So if I have, I can consolidate many document libraries down into a new site, or even take one apart. I may find that I have a site that has 3 document libraries, but this one has nothing to do with the site. It was created simply because somebody had a container and they needed the container to move that forward. I can move that document or document library list to a new environment and basically clean up that original site and put that new list in a new site as well. And at the end of all this, so this is where you're basically going through, you're moving information potentially to a new SharePoint server, you're changing the hierarchy of it, you're consolidating and cleaning up the list and document libraries. All of those problems that we had at the beginning, we're resolving through the use of this tool and resolving it in a way that can be tracked. We can go back and, as you see here, we have, sort of multiple jobs that are running as part of that infrastructure. So, it definitely does allow us to do a lot of tracking moving forward. At the end of this, you have all the structure that you want, and now you have to just be aware that the last piece of the puzzle is always post-renovation. You want to make sure that you're keeping things tidy. Keep things tidy, put into place a management framework. This is always a best practice. You can take a look at a tool like Site Administrator from Quest. You can container discovery, new environments. You can manage the existing environments. You can do a lot of reporting, policy enforcement, auditing, and permission management on top of that infrastructure. So we've gone through all the scenarios, why you want to do a renovation. We've shown you a tool that helps you resolve all those problems, and we've given you a good context for managing that post management. So from that perspective, that's the core of what we want to talk about today. But I just want to finish up as well by also talking in generic about what Quest has to offer, why we get in the SharePoint environment, and what our solutions are. So we've been focusing in this area for over 3 years now, and we've really created a set of fantastic, sophisticated, but easy to use applications that will get you to where you want to be. So 2 that we talked about today are Migration Manager, Site Administrator for SharePoint. Site Administrator for SharePoint is really the one that you want to sort of get started with. In a sense, it has so much functionality and goes really deep. And there's both a basic and a premier version. Our eStore has both Site Administrator and Recovery. Basic versions you can download, very low cost, more limited functionality, but the enterprise versions, which go a lot deeper. Recovery Manager for SharePoint is a solution that's very particular to the challenges of recovery within SharePoint. It doesn't do the backup itself, but it leverages a lot of different backup technology. So what we find in the market is that actually getting the backup is the least of your problem. It's getting it back into SharePoint, and we really have optimized that process. We recently added a self-service web service, for example, so that people can make requests to bring data back into it. And we support a lot of different data formats. We support our own Lightspeed for SQL Server from Quest. We support SDS ADM full backups. We support SQL backups, Data Protection Manager, Tivoli Storage Manager, Semantic Net Backups, Semantic Backup Exec as well, and we're adding other formats as we move forward. Also can parse to the recycle bin. It's just a great central spot to find out where all your backups are. We index every backup, search through the backups, figure out how you want to do the recovery. We optimize the recovery, and it's all in a help desk-driven UI, so it's very easy to do that. We excel at migrations. We have a lot of different migration tools. We've talked today about moving SharePoint to SharePoint, but I talked about as well is that one of the things about having a great SharePoint environment is that you want to move stuff from other places as well. So we can help you move from notes, from public folders, and from files as well into the core SharePoint environment. And then once you have this great SharePoint environment, you probably want to start building better SharePoint sites. And Quest Web Parts, we have an entire library of 18 web parts that basically allow you to do that, build better SharePoint sites. So you can do things where you're aggregating list information, which you can't do natively, add really cool 3D charts, which again you can't do natively, do more compelling forms, embed the forms right within the home page of a particular site, change the UI and how you actually connect, and what the visual cues are for a SharePoint environment. And as well with our SI connectors, connect to external data without the BDC, without the challenges of trying to configure that read-only piece. This is a read-write piece that also works in the WSS world. So it works in the portal, the core MOS environment, which is where the BDC lives and where people traditionally thought as being where you get to external data. We said, no, you can get to external data in WSS with our SI web part, so you don't have to make that investment necessarily in MOS to go up there. And then Quest has SQL Server solutions. The back end of SharePoint is nothing but SQL Server. So we have tools like Capacity Manager for SQL Server, Lightspeed, which you talked about, from the ability to back it up, performance tools and diagnostic tools on SQL as well. So we really come to the table with a lot of functionality, and as well there are some peripheral tools in the rest of the Quest product family. So we will be a company that you can grow with, and hopefully we can get the right products to you as required. And one of your next steps might be to check us out. So quest.com/SharePoint. All the tools that we talked about today are here. You can look at demos. You can look at archives of some of the events we've had in the past. You can download the tools themselves. All the tools have an embedded license. Try them out. Don't have to do much more than register, download, and away you go. There's quick start guides, and some of them have more sophisticated training guides embedded in them as well. And really, because we're committed to the overall SharePoint community, Quest has launched a SharePoint community as well recently, and it has been growing in leaps and bounds. And you'll also find free utilities, free tools there as well. So, for example, we have a free web part and an Outlook tool that basically embeds into Outlook and allows you to every time you send an email, it basically asks you if you want to store that email in SharePoint and send a link instead. Saves on Exchange space, encourages collaboration usage, great win-win story. And the web part, we talked about building better SharePoint sites. One of the things that isn't very nice in SharePoint is the discussions. It's basically just a list. It's not very interactive. We have a free web part on discussions, to discussion view, that basically supercharges those SharePoint discussions and allows you to go through there. So you know, you continue to leverage and improve that SharePoint environment that you've gone through the process of renovating. So that's pretty much all the time that we have for today. But I appreciate taking your time out from your busy schedule to take a look at that. You know, just to review, we've gone through, you know, the reasons why SharePoint gets a little bit messy and needs to be renovated, and giving you some good scenarios and some good approaches to do that. And hopefully we'll be talking to you in the future. Thank you very much.